As we said, all eyes on President Cyril Ramaphosa tonight, as he's expected to announce his cabinet at around 8 p.m. tonight. So we look now into what constitutes a proper cabinet. I'm now joined in studio by Professor Vincent Maphai. Prof is a senior research fellow at the Johannesburg Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Johannesburg. Good afternoon to you, Prof. Good to have you in studio.
Good afternoon, Palisa.
Now, the delay really, there's mixed reaction to the delay by the president to announce his cabinet. Some people saying that the two institutions, your ANC's Integrity Commission and the Public Protector's report that was released Friday implicating the former Finance Minister Prof Gordhan, may have impacted on this delay.
It's quite possible, but there could be a variety of reasons. If you recall, even when the first cabinet, when President Ramaphosa ascended to the throne, there was a few hours delay in terms of announcement. So it is quite true. I think particularly the Integrity Committee, we don't know what they have reported, we don't know what they have said, what about who, but it would surprise. I mean, the Integrity Committee issues have been there for several weeks, and it's quite disturbing to understand why are we dealing with these issues at the last moment. The public protector would be relevant only to the extent, for example, that the Minister of Public Enterprises was also on the list of cabinet ministers to come through, and in that sense, the Public Protector's report must have put a spanner in the works, forcing the president to juggle his plans. So I think both of them had a role to play.
Yeah.
And the other simple reason, maybe there's still an argument about who should be where.
Yeah, I think that's the big one, really. We spoke to Mr. Gordhan's legal representative yesterday on the show, was basically saying that they're taking the report on a review, and this automatically means that the findings are suspended or they fall off until that review takes place. But I want us to look into the factors really, or the issues that the president have to bear in mind while thinking about who to appoint and where. I mean, there are a number of issues really that have been raised. The issue of gender representation, the issue of generational mix, trying to bring young blood into the cabinet, and also the alliance partners.
This is true, and unfortunately, this is the most difficult assignment for any president. I've listened to comments, I've listened to people say, putting together a cabinet is a far cry, for example, from putting together a company exco, where you have a tradition that we will only appoint people with an acquired Oxbridge accent or anything of the sort. Cabinet, you have to balance quite a whole host of issues. And the first things that obviously the president has to look at in terms of public opinion would be any person with a dubious past or somebody whose name has been dragged into the mud. It becomes a very, very difficult appointment to make. And I know the argument made is that innocent until proved guilty, but that's a legal principle, not a political principle. Political principles follow a different route, and the core of which is that what will the presence or absence of this person do to the reputation or effectiveness of government? And then there's gender, there's a regional representation, there's a whole host of those issues. And it's not a simple fact that you choose the best. It doesn't work that way. And I think realistically, we should say, we hope at least 80% of cabinet is top rate. You are not going to get 100% top rate people. And sometimes you may have to drag in people who are not high flyers, simply because their exclusion may be worse than their inclusion. So it is a difficult, complex issue. And although ultimately the president has to make the final call, you can also be sure that it is a subject of severe debate amongst the top six. And we know that the top six in the ANC is not always singing in unison. In short, rather him than me.
Yeah, that's true. And of course, what could even make it more difficult is the fact that some departments are going to be merged. So
That's
we're
right.
going to see now a much more smaller cabinet than in previous years.
That's another source of major pain. I mean, you have 72 ministers and deputies now. There's absolutely no rational basis for that. And to cut it down, you have to be sure what happens to the other people. One of the unfortunate culture that has developed in our politics over time is that we have no culture of, if you remove a minister, then you have to decide where am I taking them to. And maybe as a lesson for the future, one of the things future presidents should bear in mind, it may be too late for the current president, is to appoint people who have life outside cabinet or life outside government, so that when they have to leave, they don't make it difficult.
Now, Prof, I want us to talk about what constitutes a proper cabinet. We have expanded on the fact that it's not going to be an easy one for President Cyril Ramaphosa, but the president himself has been emphasizing the fact that he's looking to placing competent individuals in the different portfolios.
That's right.
What constitutes that competent individual, and how do we go about measuring the competency there?
I was hoping to put that question back to you and say competent at what? But I think there's a basic minimum qualification that a minister should have. And the first one, which they share with other members of parliament or other members or other elected officials, is that they have to carry a certain level of democratic, they have to be authorized through a democratic process so that they are legitimized by a democratic process. And of course, our constitution recognizes that and makes an exception only for 2 ministers who may be appointed outside that. But I think for me, the key function of a minister, first of all, is the ability to conceptualize, lead, and introduce policy. That is really the first thing they should be able to do. If a minister has no conception of what are the policy options for him or for her, that means you are going to have a very, very rudderless department. The other qualifications that a minister should have is the ability to carry support of his colleagues or her colleagues in cabinet, other cabinet ministers, and particularly that of the president, because after you have put your policy together, you need the means to actually mobilize resources to support that. And the last one is to actually make sure that you've got a strong team of public servants whom you can lead in the implementation of policy. That for me is the absolute minimum. We sometimes get confused and then talk about a minister must be appointed because he's very good and uncorrupt. I really think that is warped logic. Nobody should be rewarded for being not corrupt. You should be punished for being corrupt. So if you are clean, that's not a qualification for cabinet.
Yeah.
There has to be skills beyond being an honest and faithful servant.
Yeah, you've got to have the necessary requirements.
That's
and
right.
in most cases, we tend to focus on the cabinet itself and really forgetting the most important people, who are the public servants who are there to implement service delivery, for example, your director generals.
Yes.
Let's talk about the importance of their roles within the departments.
Okay, let's take 1 or 2 steps back as a context to that. If you look at the results now, the ANC could easily have lost the elections. They were actually saved by 2 factors. One, which is the president himself, President Ramaphosa, and the other one has been a lackluster opposition. People didn't trust that you can replace the ANC with any parts of the opposition. I think that's a key thing. So the ANC is living on borrowed time. And what are the 2 key things that are going to matter? And we saw them even before the elections. I think from now on, the ANC is going to be judged solely on two things: the integrity of its leadership and the capacity to deliver. The integrity, let's put aside. The capacity to deliver is going to depend on the capacity and quality of the public service. It is better to have a pretty weak minister supported by strong public servants than to have a strong minister surrounded by weak public servants. So increasingly, after this process tonight, we should be watching carefully who are actually the people to deliver. And our public servants have a very, very checkered history, not in terms of their integrity or lack of it, but the interface between elected and appointed officials has always been very difficult. Ministers coming in and trying to influence where the tenders are going. That's the domain of the public service. And I think it doesn't matter how good this cabinet is. If it is not underpinned by a strong layer of very, very capable public servants led by a strong DG, we are getting nowhere.
Yeah, we've also had the president, of course, during his inauguration speech on Saturday, emphasizing the fact that we met the people on the ground. We know what they want. Now it's time to deliver. So a lot of people saying that he may have a good plan in mind, but the implementation part of it may be a challenge.
Precisely. I think, and that is why I'm saying after we have looked at the cabinet, the next thing to watch is that who is going to be the implementing team. This is crucial in and by itself. But if you notice, many of the problems of service delivery have very little to do with lack of budgets and everything to do with the lack of capacity to deliver.
All right, so let's just go back to the issue of making the cabinet a bit smaller. A lot of people, of course, speculating that we may see the economic cluster, all the departments coming together, your small business, your DTI, your economic development coming together. And you and I had this conversation earlier on where you were basically saying that that would be a good idea, so that there is one person to take the blame for our economic standing if we do not perform well economically.
That is true. You know, I always believe that accountability is personal. Somebody has to take personal responsibility. If you hear very lovely phrases like we take collective responsibility, it's a euphemism for saying nobody takes responsibility for that. And if that is the starting point, then it becomes very, very critical, as I said earlier, to make sure that there's no confusion at cabinet level. It's no secret that our economy is in disarray, total disarray. Now, who must take responsibility for it? Is it the Minister of Finance? Is it the Minister of the DTI? Is this the Minister of Small Enterprises? Is this the Minister of Economic Policy? This is the most irrational structure for a very, very important portfolio. It doesn't make sense. They probably spend time more tramping on each other's toes than doing the job that needs to be done. If there is a cluster that needs to be tidied, it is that cluster. And in my humble opinion, it does not need more than two ministries. Finance, it's always important to be standalone. And the cluster of these three, I don't care what you call them, but they need to be meshed into one unit.
Yeah, and you also have the Department of Basic Education, the Department of Higher Education, and you have Science and Technology as well.
Yeah, you know, I think basic education, you can live on its own, or if you are going to match anything with it, in my opinion, it may be something like arts and culture. That I can see that route. Higher education, you can easily match it with science and technology. I think they would complement each other very well. Sports, you must just find a place to look it in somewhere. I also don't think It's a department that needs to be on its own.
And of course, we're also expecting the announcement of the deputy president. There was a huge speculation when the former deputy president, David Mabuza, delayed his swearing in Parliament last week. He was, of course, eventually sworn in this week. Do you think he's going to go back as the deputy president?
We don't know. First of all, President Ramaphosa is under no obligation whatsoever to appoint him deputy president, and the various spokespeople of the ANC have emphasized that from the point of view of the ANC, the only position that is automatic is that the president of the ANC also becomes the president of the country. The deputy is still an open question. We know that there's pressure for a female president, and I'm sure it must have been one of the things weighing heavily in the mind of the president. So all I'm saying is, if for any reason the president decides to appoint a woman for deputy president, Mr. Mabuza cannot cry foul. There's no automatic entitlement to that.
Yeah, but what do you make of his delay really to be sworn in, wanting to clear his name before the Integrity Commission before he could take that oath?
It was strange. I cannot really explain it. Again, why do it now? I mean, we knew all about this a long time ago. These are things that could have been done earlier. And it could be he just wanted to strengthen his position within a short minimum time that did not allow a lot of long-winded debates. I cannot really explain, but it doesn't make sense in short.
But generally speaking, Prof, do you think we may be in for a big surprise tonight when the cabinet is announced, considering everything that has happened?
You know, President Ramaphosa leaves no food tracks behind, and he places cards very close to his chest. You can't even read his face sometimes on these issues. The appointment of a female deputy to me won't come as a surprise, because there's already been so much talk about it.
And who could that be? Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma?
I think, in my opinion, she's a very strong contender for that position. You know, she has a track record of delivery.
Yeah.
If you look at the Department of Home Affairs, at one point it was among the top performing. I remember I couldn't believe it, getting my passport and IDs within a very short time. At one point it was really functioning very well. Yeah. She's very strong, she's very deliberate, she's very methodical, and quite relentless. Once her teeth look like a bulldog, you know.
Yeah, but the relationship really between the two as well, they get along quite well.
But more than getting well, quite well, and you're right, they complement each other very well. For me, that would be my dream team, but I'm not a super president to choose for president.
Indeed, of course, some people saying that it may also be Dr. Naledi Pandor, because that was her preferred deputy president of the ANC during Nasrec. Absolutely.
I only answered because you asked me about Dr. Nkosazana, but between her and Naledi Pandor, it's a, you know, you just twist your coin and see what happens. They bring different strengths, but very strong people, and I would sleep very well with either of them. I mean, in the case, either of them is a deputy.
Yeah, but of course, in his cabinet, we will also have to witness the unity that they have been preaching, that it reigns in the ANC itself.
Well, for example, somebody like Nkosazana can already help in that thing. The only problem with the notion of unity is, what exactly are you unifying? You know, you can't unify water and oil. It doesn't matter how hard you try. And if that unity means we are going to sweep under the carpet pressing issues around corruption, pressing issues about criminal behavior, then you are actually not uniting the ANC. You are actually creating a bigger grave for it in the long term.
Just in conclusion, Prof, as we're sitting here and speculating what might happen tonight, what do you think his priorities should be? I mean, he made a commitment on Saturday during his inauguration speech that he wants to end poverty in 25 years' time. So I suppose a big task really lies ahead of him.
You know, it sounds like a cop-out. Everything in the country is a priority because there are so many things to be done. If you are pushing me very hard to nail myself, I think the first thing he should focus on getting the economy to function. A dysfunctional economy will never carry this country, that is for sure. So he needs to bring certainty, he needs to push very hard on domestic and international investment. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen in 24 hours. People wait and see. The second thing for me that the president needs to look at is just personal safety of ordinary South Africans. We now seriously need to get the police and law enforcement doing their job. If people are not safe, they will take law into their hands. And the other thing that needs to get growing, particularly in the townships, is education. Education underpins everything. It's not an answer to every problem. But if education fails, so will be your employment equity program, so will be your BEE programs, because all those required very strong and qualified people, and in the absence of strong and qualified people, you are exposing people to ridicules of tokenism, favoritism. And so the stronger and the more our people are educated, the greater their confidence and the greater the challenges that we will be part of a modern economy which is depending less and less on unskilled labor and more on sophisticated labor.
All right. So according to you, the 5 pillars of the previous administration should still continue as they were: poverty eradication, education, as you say, community safety, and so on.
Agree.
Yeah. All right, Prof, we'll leave it at this. Thank you so much for coming through. Always good to have you in studio with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.